Hello and welcome to Trapping Today. I have breaking news. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service just announced today that they are listing the wolverine as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. So we're going to talk about a little bit of history of wolverine and what this might mean for trappers, for hunters, for resource users out in the western states. This is kind of a big deal. It's going to affect a lot of you guys. Anyway, that's not a wolverine, it's a fisher, but Wolverine's a little brother that we have here in northern Maine. And believe it or not, Wolverines once were found in Maine back in long time ago, 1700s, 1800s. There were occasional Wolverines here. Obviously, they don't get along with people very well, and they've been gone for more than 150 years. But Wolverines are one of the coolest animals in the world. I love them. I think they're just awesome. They're these ferocious members of the weasel family. They're big, tough, strong. They get 20 to 40 pounds. I went trapping for wolverine in Alaska. The one we caught when I was there was 38 pounds. That was kind of near the top end. It was a big male. They are just an awesome animal, just a powerful, vicious animal. Wolverines are scavengers. They feed on dead animals and basically clean up carcasses, follow carcasses around from moose or deer, elk, caribou, depending on where they're at. And they live in very northern climates. They need lots of snow and cold in order to complete all of their life cycle. They like to be very remote and away from people. So where people become established in civilization, there's a lot of noise and a lot of activity. Wolverines don't tend to do very well. So Wolverines were present in the lower 48, basically across a little bit in Maine, and then some in the whole northern tier of states. And in the western mountains, Wolverines were present there historically. They were extirpated sometime around the 1920s or a little bit earlier than that, basically when people settled the West. There's a tendency, if there's too much trapping pressure, hunting or trapping pressure, Wolverines can be over-harvested. If there's too much activity, too much disruption of either wildlife populations or of them directly, they're going to leave an area. So they basically were wiped out by the 1920s in the western states. Nobody really said much about it. Nobody really thought much about it. And there may have been some remnant Wolverine populations that kind of stayed around. I don't know that anybody really could confirm that they were completely extirpated from those states. But over the years, Wolverines have slowly and steadily come back. They have re-established populations, and they've been around for decades now. And they're actually becoming more and more common in the lower 48. It's very interesting. So you have a lot of high elevation areas in the Rocky Mountains. You have wilderness areas, in particular in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, that are very remote, don't see a lot of people. And although Wolverines were kind of wiped out from a lot of those areas, and it was hard for them to recolonize because the populations in Canada were far away, and it took a long time for individuals to move into this habitat that they had been extirpated from. They did it over time. Wolverines are unique in that individuals can and will move long distances. They've been documented traveling these huge migrations. And you wonder what the heck that Wolverine is doing running across the prairie and heading toward the next mountain range. Well, it's going to see if there's any suitable habitat there. Maybe it's looking for food and seeing if it can find a better opportunity to live out there. And as the populations became more abundant in certain areas, Wolverines would disperse into new habitat, into different mountain ranges. They became fairly common. So it is believed that there are about 300 Wolverines in the lower 48 states. They have done some work with like camera trapping. They've done some hair trapping. It's got DNA, genetics work. There's been several different research projects looking at Wolverine. They think there's about 300. Doesn't seem like a lot, but for Wolverine, they tend to be in relatively low densities anyway. So 300 maybe actually quite a few Wolverines. There was only one state left in the lower 48 that you could actually still trap Wolverines, and that was Montana. And I had the unique opportunity to try to catch a Wolverine in Montana when I was out there. It must have been around 2009 or 2010. And I had seen a Wolverine up in this mountain range in the summertime when I was up hiking. And I was quite sure it was a Wolverine, but I only got a really quick glimpse of it. While I was back in that same area during trapping, in the wintertime, during trapping season, I was trapping for marten. And I cut a set of Wolverine tracks. That was just the coolest thing in the world. And the Wolverine trapping was highly regulated. I think the quota was only 3 Wolverines in the whole state, if I'm not mistaken. So it was very, very low opportunity to harvest. And a lot of it was a guy was out trapping for something else, and if you caught a Wolverine, you had the chance to harvest it. And so sometimes they would fill the quota, sometimes it wouldn't get filled. But the quota, the sub quota, I want to say was 1 in my region, in my area. So there was one opportunity for someone to catch a Wolverine there, and I set one trap, a 220 up on a leaning pole with some bait, and I went back, checked it a couple times, and that Wolverine never did come back to that area. But it was just so awesome to actually have the opportunity to try to get that close to maybe catching a Wolverine. Anyway, in 2012, I actually left Montana in 2012, and that same year they discontinued trapping of Wolverines in the state, and so they're closed to trapping. There is the occasional Wolverine is caught in traps that are intended for other species, but it's very, very minimal. It's far less than what the historical quotas had been when there was a trapping season. So, why now? Why is it that the Endangered Species Act, for guys that don't know, a little background on it, it was put into law. It's a federal law that came in 1973, and what it does is identifies species that are in low abundance and are in danger of becoming extinct. The law had extremely good intentions. It wanted to prevent further extinction of animals and to do whatever we could in order to recover those species. Since 1973, the Endangered Species Act, has been used in so many ways to do so many things that have not contributed to recovery of species, but have been severely limiting to the rights and privileges that United States citizens have. In particularly resource users, people who hunt, fish, trap, farm, raise livestock, cut timber, do timber forest harvesting, forest management. All those things have been incredibly impacted by the ESA, which would be kind of cool and understandable if the ESA actually was the driving force that caused these populations to recover, but in most cases it has not been. There are a few instances where the Endangered Species Act was directly responsible for, or very highly tied to, species recovery. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is the bald eagle. And that was a very clear-cut case where the use of DDT was causing bald eagle mortality of young chicks, pre-hatch mortality of chicks because the eggshells couldn't develop properly. They were endangered. The DDT was banned in the United States. Guess what? The eagles came back and they did awesome. Recovery. Perfect. However, in every other case that I am aware of, in the vast majority of cases, species never get taken off the list, and there's nothing that changes in those recovery of those species. Sometimes species do get delisted or downlisted because of additional data that shows that they never really were endangered to begin with. But the problem that I see with the Endangered Species Act, and I am speaking from experience as having been in the state of Maine with Canada lynx being threatened under the Endangered Species Act since I think like 2007. So this has been going on for, actually it may have been before that, I'll have to check. But there's a big lawsuit that added protections since then. But basically, Canada lynx never were in danger of ever becoming extinct in northern Maine. And the data has always shown that, and the populations have increased over the years. And for the past 15 years, they should have been delisted and nothing has happened. Look at wolves. Wolves took forever. Wolf populations just exploded out west, and it took forever to get those buggers delisted, and they're still having delistings are being overturned in the Midwestern states in Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin area. And wolves are just out of control. Populations are incredibly abundant and becoming such that they're in really high conflict with people. So the Canada lynx issue raises a lot of alarm for me because it has completely changed the way that we've been able to trap in northern Maine, and the science and the data have nothing to do with the decisions that were made. It was all to do with what the Endangered Species Act said, what the law said, and this species is covered under the law, and that's the way it has to be. There was no common sense, there was no flexibility. There was, this is the way it is, and when the data showed that they could and should be delisted, the delisting process started like 5 years ago. I haven't heard, nothing's happened. We haven't had any updates. So this moves, this whole system moves like molasses. And the other thing is, what was the reason for lynx recovery? During the delisting process, they're going to say, oh, it's because we set aside this forest and because we're managing this in this way. Nothing was done, really. I mean, if anything, there was more timber that was cut, which maybe created a little better habitat for the lynx. Has been very negative for other species like marten. But that's another story. But really, they're going to run around in circles to try to say that, well, we've done enough to recover lynx, but in fact they never needed to be recovered because they never were threatened with extinction. I fear the same thing will happen with the wolverine. Now, are wolverines threatened? I don't know. It seems that the federal government doesn't know, depending on the year. There have been attempts to list wolverines beginning back in the 1990s. I think when we started realizing how many there actually were, there were these populations, In 2011, there was an attempt. There was another big push about 3 years ago to list. The Trump administration basically overturned that, or said basically no. The data shows that wolverine populations are increasing. The states, most of the states seem to agree with that as well. A federal judge vacated that Trump administration decision and told the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that they were to reconsider that decision not to list lynx, and they reconsidered it. They relooked at the data. They said there was additional information and new information that showed that wolverines did need to be listed as threatened. That new information was a couple of things. The big driving factor that they believe is causing wolverine to be threatened is climate change. And so as the climate is warming, these high elevation, snowy, cold areas are projected to decrease in in area, in volume. As they decrease, there's going to be less available habitat for Wolverine, and there are human activities like snowmobiling and skiing and other recreation that is potentially going to conflict with Wolverine when they're concentrated into smaller areas. The other reason they stated is that there's some road issues in Canada that are preventing, that are disconnecting habitat and preventing migration of Wolverines, or they believe preventing migration into the lower 48. And some of the genetic work, they said they were less genetically diverse than they had previously thought. And so that kind of makes sense. But when you think back in terms of, okay, what's the purpose of the ESA? It's so that we can recover these species. But we're saying the reason that these species are declining are things that are completely out of our control. We're not going to overturn climate change because Wolverines are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. We're probably not going to go and tell Canada that they need to do things differently in order to send more Wolverines our way either. We obviously did not do that with Canada lynx. They still trap them right across the border in Canada, just in Quebec, across from where I'm at in northern Maine. So there's nothing that this listing is going to do, in my opinion, that's going to cause the recovery of Wolverine. Wolverines are actually recovering, so I think they're going to be in pretty decent shape anyway. The problem is the downside of the listing. And when species get listed, we saw this with lynx in Maine. I'm going to mention something with grizzlies. That's another species, grizzly bears. They're going crazy in the western states. They're out of control. They're moving into all these different mountain ranges. People are getting mauled. People are getting killed. Grizzlies has no fear of humans anymore. It's unreal. The last few years I was in Montana, it was almost scary. Just grizzlies everywhere. Still threatened under the Endangered Species Act. No attempt to delist them. The problem with this listing is that this is a legal avenue, and a couple of things what listing does. It doesn't really affect private property if you don't take any government money. But any federal property or any project that involves federal money requires a Section 7 consultation under the Endangered Species Act with the Fish and Wildlife Service before you can proceed on any project. And if it doesn't pass that consultation, or if you don't do the things that are required to prevent any potential harm to a Wolverine, then you're out of luck. You don't get funded for the project, or you don't get approved. The other portion of the act, and that's going to affect potentially a lot of different projects on Forest Service land, for instance, or even private projects that involve federal money. The other part of the act is the takings clause, which prevents any activity that would cause a regulatory taking of Wolverine, which means would cause a Wolverine to be killed. So what that means is if you do something that causes a Wolverine to be killed, you can be sued, and you can be you can get in a lot of trouble. Jail time, huge fines, loss of any licenses, whatever. The animal rights activist groups use this takings clause to do their work. This is going to be another avenue for them. And the very first thing they're going to do, because they're doing this right now with grizzlies, they're going to try to shut down the wolf trapping and wolf harvesting programs in the states of Montana and Idaho. This is coming. As soon as Wolverines are getting listed, I guarantee you that the preparations are already underway for these lawsuits. There's recently been a lawsuit in Montana about the wolf trapping season, and the animal rights groups that brought suit claimed that there were grizzly bears that were being caught in those wolf traps. And I mean, most of those traps are not going to hold a grizzly bear, but there was some evidence that maybe they were hurt, getting their paw hurt a little bit. And because of that potential for harm, the judge in Missoula actually shut down the wolf trapping season and is restricting it to certain months of the year. And I think that is still under litigation. That's going to go back and forth in court. That's going to happen in Idaho too, guarantee it, because grizzlies are a listed species under the Endangered Species Act. Now that Wolverines are going to be listed, the same thing is going to happen. They're going to work to shut down the trapping season in Montana and in Idaho and in Wyoming. Trapping with body grip traps, particularly, that could cause lethal catches of Wolverines. I believe in the listing they said that they are going to include some level of exemption for incidental take for trapping and for timber harvest, forest management purposes. So I guess if you drop some trees and it falls on a Wolverine, then you're going to be exempt for now. The animal rights groups have already said that they're going to fight that and try to get that language changed. So, and I don't know the specifics of the language. In the case with Maine, the feds actually were able to dictate exactly how we set traps, what traps we set, and the specs on what the traps look like, the boxes that we had to design to keep lynx out away from our traps. So they're saying right now that this is good news, that they're going to have maybe some exceptions for that, but that's going to come. I'm sure that's going to come. And there's some states that are probably going to have a little bit more sympathetic wildlife departments, and states like Washington State, where there are Wolverines, there's already essentially no trapping there to begin with. Oregon, there's potential to impact trappers in Oregon. Washington, you can cage trap. I don't know if that's going to affect the cage trapping there. Utah, there's potential with Utah, although Utah will probably hold out for a long time because they're a real conservative state. Anyway, there's several other states where there are some Wolverines, but they're no known populations as of yet. But Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming are the big three. So this is going to be an issue, and now that they're listed, in my lifetime, I don't think they'll ever be delisted. So this is just something else that we're going to have to deal with. You trappers out west are going to have lawsuits on your hands. You're going to be fighting them. You're going to be spending a lot of money to try to keep trapping. The wolf trapping, especially, potentially some of that snaring and cable restraint stuff, that's going to be under fire. It's going to be very hard. So that's what's going on, guys. That's brand new news, and I'm kind of conflicted on it because I think Wolverines are really cool, and I think we should do everything we can within reason to protect them. But I don't think this was necessary. I think each of the states have very, very capable wildlife management programs. They have excellent biologists who really care about what they do. They work hard and they collect a lot of good information, and they have common sense rules for the most part. So especially those three states, they're managing their wildlife. Look at the results. Look at the way Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho are managing their wildlife. You might not agree with maybe some of the methods that people use, but just look at the results. Wildlife is incredibly abundant there. So that's going to change. It's going to be another challenge. I feel that Wolverine can be effectively managed by the states, but this Endangered Species Act is what it is, and until and if it ever changes, it's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on and be dealing with. It's very unfortunate that it's politically motivated, and it shouldn't be this way. It shouldn't matter whether there's a D or an R in front of your name. The data should be the data, science. You should objectively look at it and make common sense decisions. But it seems like if there's a D in the White House, more species get listed. If there's an R in the White House, fewer species get listed, and some get potentially delisted, although usually the process gets started and then the R leaves and the D comes in and reverses the process, because everything just has such a long lag time here. But that's just the way it is. It's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate that wildlife management has to be political, but that's where we're at. We play with the team we've got. We deal with live in the world we live in. So just wanted to let you guys know that that's coming, and I'll probably do a little bit more on the Trapping Today podcast. Go trappingtoday.com. Probably talk in more detail, different stories with the Wolverine and with the grizzly as well. But hope this is useful for all of you, and just know that it's coming. All right, guys, take care.